Hey everybody, how's it going? In this video, we'll be learning how to work with dates within Python. Now, it's extremely important to know how to work with dates because you're going to be using these in just about every type of application that you're going to write. And dates can sometimes be overwhelming because there's so much to think about. So, for example, in Python, we have dates, times, date times, time zones, time deltas, and it's not really obvious when we should use what. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at some examples of this to get more comfortable. So the main module for working with dates in Python is the Datetime module, and we can import that just by saying import datetime. Now the first thing to talk about when working with dates and times is understanding the difference between naive and aware date times, and you'll hear these two terms a lot. Now naive dates and times don't have enough information to determine things like time zone or daylight savings times, but they're easier to work with if you don't need that level of detail. But if you do need that level of detail to avoid confusion, then you need to use aware dates and times. Now these do have enough information to determine their time zone and keep track of daylight savings time. Now since naive date times are the easiest to work with, we'll start off by looking at those first. So first, let's look at datetime.date. So with a normal date, we're going to be working with a year, month, and day. Now there are a couple of different ways that we can create a date. But to create a date right now, I'm just going to do a datetime.date, and I'm going to pass in a year, a month, and a day. So now let's go ahead and print this out so we can see what this looks like. So you can see that when we printed that out, that it gave us a date of 2016-07-24. Now when you're creating these dates, be sure to just pass in regular integers as the days and months with no leading zero. Because if we were to pass in 07 here and run that, you can see that this gave us a syntax error. And I make this mistake a lot myself because when I write down dates, I'm used to adding in that leading zero, but that's not the correct way to pass it in. So just do, for single digits, just do that single digit, and you can see that that works. Now we do have other ways of creating dates also. So if I wanted to get today's local date, then I'm just going to call this today. And instead of doing this constructor here, I'm just going to do date.today. So now I'm just going to go ahead and grab this variable name here, and let's go ahead and print that out. So when I print that out, you can see that we got the current local date. Now we also have some methods available to get more information about our dates. So if I wanted to grab just the year, month, or day, then, so for example, if I wanted to grab just the year, I could say today.year. And if I wanted to grab just the day, then I could do day. Now we can also get the day of the week, and there's actually two different ways that we can use this. So we can either use weekday or we can use ISO weekday. So if I go ahead and print this out, you can see that for one, we get a 1, and for the other one, we get a 2. So the only difference here is that for the weekday, Monday is 0 and Sunday is 6. And for the ISO weekday, Monday is 1 and Sunday is 7. So the current day where I am now, it is Tuesday. So you can see that for the weekday, we got a 1, which if Monday is 0, then Tuesday, that would be correct. And for the ISO weekday, Monday is 1, so Tuesday would be 2, so that's correct also. Okay, so now let's take a look at time deltas. Now time deltas are simply the difference between two dates or times, and they're extremely useful when we want to do operations on our dates or times. So for example, let me create a time delta 1 week away, which would be 7 days. So I'm going to do a time delta is equal to datetime.time delta, and I'm just going to pass in a duration here of days equal to 7. So now I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of these two print statements here. So now that I have this duration of 7 days, I can use this to do some calculations. So let's say that I wanted to print out what the date will be 1 week from now. So what I can do here is I can just do a print, and I'm going to print out today plus this time delta, which would be 7 days. So if I run that, then you can see that it prints out what the date will be 7 days from now. Now you can also subtract time deltas also. So if I wanted to know what the date was 1 week ago, then instead of adding on 7 days, I can subtract 7 days. And if I print that out, then you can see that it prints out what the date was 1 week ago. Okay, so right now we are adding and subtracting a time delta from a date and getting another date as the result. Now, if we instead add or subtract a date from a date, then we'll get a time delta as the result. And so that's kind of important to see the difference there. So if I make a comment here so that we can better visualize this. So let me do time delta. And let me also make another comment here, but change a few things around. Okay, so this comment will make what I just said here a little bit easier to visualize. So if we add or subtract a time delta from a date, then we get another date as a result. And if we add or subtract another date from a date, then we'll get a time delta as a result. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of this. So let's figure out how many days there are until my birthday this year. So to calculate that, what we're going to have to do is subtract the current date from the date of my birthday this year. So I'm going to create a new date here called B-Day. I'm going to set that equal to datetime.date. And that's going to be the year 2016, and my birthday is on 9/24. So now I'm going to create another variable here, and I'm going to call this till B-Day. Now this is going to be a time delta once we run this calculation. And I'm going to say till B-Day is equal to my birthday minus the current day. So now if I print out this till B-Day and run that, you can see that it has 60 days as the total duration between those two dates. And if you want to get just the days, then you can do the time delta dot days and print that, and you can see that that's equal to 60. Now you can also use the total seconds here. So I'm going to do total seconds, and that's a method to get the number of seconds between these two dates. So if I print that out, oh, and it looks like I forgot to do total seconds. So if I print that out, then you can see I have a little more than 5 million seconds to go until my birthday. Okay, so now that we have looked at this datetime.date right here, now let's look at datetime.time. And I'm just going to go ahead and set this variable equal to t. Okay, so when we were working with datetime.date, we were only working with year, month, and day. And with datetime.time, we're going to be working with hours, minutes, seconds, and microseconds. So this isn't going to include the year, the month, or the day. Now by default, this doesn't have time zone information, so this is still naive. But we can specify a time zone using tzinfo if we'd liked, and we'll look at some time zones in just a second. But for now, we're going to create a new time. So I can create a new local time by saying datetime.time, and I'm going to pass in hours, minutes, seconds, and microseconds. So now I'm just going to go ahead and print this out so we can see what this looks like. So you can see that it printed out here in a nice format. And just like with the date, we can access these attributes individually. So if I wanted to just print out the hour, then I can just print out the hour. Now, to be honest, I hardly ever use datetime.time because most of the time when I need the time of day, I also need the date. And that's where datetime.datetime comes in. So what we had here is we had datetime.date, and that gave us the year, month, and day without the hours, minutes, seconds, and microseconds. And then we had datetime.time, and that gave us the hours, minutes, and seconds, and microseconds without the year, month, and the day. And the datetime.datetime, that's going to give us access to everything. So for example, if I create a new datetime here, then I could pass in all of these. So I'll pass in the year of 2016, 7/26, then I'll just do 12 for the hours, 30 for the minutes, 45 for the seconds, and another 100,000 for the milliseconds. And I'm going to go ahead and call this DT for date time. Let's go ahead and print this out. So now if I print this out, you can see that it gave us back the entire date and the time. So we have the whole date right here, and then we have the time here. Now date times are great because we have access to just about anything we would need. So I can grab the date without the time just by saying dt.date here, and that is a method. And vice versa, I could grab the time just by doing datetime.time, and if I run that, you can see that we just get the time. And on top of that, we can still grab each individual attribute like we did before. So let's say that I wanted just the year, then I can just go ahead and print out the year. And just like we did with the date, we can also add and subtract time delta duration. So let me go ahead and recreate that time delta. And the way that we did that was datetime dot time delta. And I'm also just going to do the days of 7 again. Okay, so now instead of printing out just this date time, now I'm going to add on this time delta. And if I print that out, you can see that that prints out a week into the future. And now with this date time, I can also use a duration of hours or minutes or whatever. So if I was to change this duration instead of days of 7, let's say I'll do hours and I'll do 12 hours into the future. And if I print that out, you can see that my time was set to 12:30 here. So by adding 12 hours, that carried us over into the next day. And this is 30 minutes past midnight. Okay, so now let's look at some of the alternative constructors that come with our date time. So 3 of these that are pretty useful that a lot of people get confused about are .today. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy these down 3 different times here. And I'm going to call this dt.today. I'm going to call this one dt.now, and I'm going to call this one dt UTC And I'm going to do today, and this one will be datetime.now, and this one will be .UTC now. Okay, so now let me go ahead and print all of these out here before I describe what each individual one is. So let me copy these here and print these out. Okay, so you can see that the top 2 here are pretty similar, and they would be exactly the same if they had been executed at the same time. So these millisecond differences here are just due to the small amounts of time between when they were executed. So if datetime.today and datetime.now look almost identical here, then what is the difference between these? So the difference is that .today returns the current local date time with a time zone of none. And .now gives us the option to pass in a time zone. So if you leave the time zone empty, then these are similar. Now you might assume here that .utc now, since it has UTC in the name of the method, that this is a time zone aware date time, and that's actually not true. So this gives us the current UTC time, but the TZ info is still set to none. So nothing that we've done so far has given us time zone aware date times. We have to explicitly set those. So that's a good segue into looking at how to use time zones. Now there's a lot of different ways that we could look at using time zones, but I think I'm going to go ahead and jump directly into showing you how to use PyTZ. Now PyTZ is a third-party package that you have to install using pip. Now, if you have never used the pip package manager, then you can watch my video on how to use that. But if you already have it set up, then you should be able to jump over to your terminal and just type in pip install, and that is PyTZ. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not showing you how to work with time zones using the standard library. But even in the Python docs here, they recommend using PyTZ. So here's their justification for that. They say that the standard library has time zone class for handling arbitrary fixed offsets from UTC and timezone.utc. PyTZ library brings in this time zone database to Python, and its usage is recommended. So we could use this time zone class to work with time zones, but since PyTZ is pretty easy to use and since it's more useful, we may as well go ahead and use that right off the bat. So let's go ahead and go back here to our module, and at the top, now after you install that using pip, now we're just going to import PyTZ. So before we make any more date times here, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up some of this and remove a couple of these functions. And I'm just going to copy those out for now. And let's go ahead and make a new date time. Now, if you were to go out and read through the documentation for PyTZ, then you'll see that it's recommended to always work with UTC when dealing with time zones. And there's a lot of good reasons for that I'm not going to go into detail about here. So let's go ahead and create a time zone aware date time using UTC. Now, to do this, we can just do dt equals datetime dot datetime. And now I can go ahead and plug in all those values. So I'm going to do a year of 2016, 7, 26, 12 for the hours, 30 for the minutes, 45 for the seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and leave off the milliseconds this time. And now, to make this time zone aware, we can just say tzInfo equals pytz dot UTC. So now let me go ahead and print out this date time, and we can see what this looks like. So now you can see that our date time has this +00 on the end. Now this is the UTC offset. Now let's get the current UTC time that is also time zone aware. So there are two ways that we can do this. So remember, we have .now and we also have .utc now. But first let's work with .now. So with datetime.now, we can pass in the time zone. So this is, instead of tzInfo, this is actually tz equals, same thing, we'll do pytz.utc. And let me go ahead and print that out so that you can see what that looks like, datetime now. And so this is the current UTC time, and you can see the milliseconds added on there. And another way to do this, which you might see people do online, is we also have this .utc now. Now, this doesn't have the option of passing in the time zone, but what we could do is do UTC now, which creates a new date time, and then we can do a dot replace on that tzInfo and set that equal to pytz.utc. And let's go ahead and print this out. So you can see that both of these ways of getting the current UTC time that is time zone aware, these are both pretty much the same. But I prefer to use this datetime.now with the time zone set because it's a little less typing and it's also slightly easier to read. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And I don't think I'm going to be using this date time here anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that as well. Okay, so now we have the current UTC time, and it's also time zone aware. And I'm actually going to go ahead and call this UTC now so that it makes a little bit more sense. So let's look at how we can convert this to a different time zone. So I'm currently located close to Denver in the United States, which is the Mountain Time Zone. So if I wanted to convert this UTC time to my time zone, then I could just say, I'll call this DT Mountain, and I'll say DT UTC now dot as time zone, and now we can just pass in the time zone that we want. And this is going to be pytz dot time zone, and the time zone that I'm going to pass in here is US-Mountain. So now let me go ahead and print this out, and we can see the difference between these two date times. So you can see that if I print that out, the time that it printed out for current mountain time, if I look at my machine here, 8:45, and that's pretty much what we have here. And that also has the UTC offset set to -6, which is the difference between my local time and the UTC time. Now you might be wondering how I knew to type in US Mountain here for the PyTZ time zone. So PyTZ has a large list of time zones for you to select from. Now, if you want to look at all of them, then you can print them all out by using a for loop. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's do for TZ in PyTZ, and the list of those time zones is in a list called all time zones. So within this for loop, I'm just going to print out TZ. And let me go ahead and comment out these other print statements for now. And let's go ahead and run that and bring this up a bit. So you can see that we have a lot of time zones here, but if I scroll up a bit, then we can see the United States time zone. And, so here we have US Eastern, US Mountain, Pacific, and things like that. So if you have an idea of what your time zone is, then you can just go ahead and search through this pytz.alltimezones list and see specifically what you need to type in order to get that set correctly. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and take this out and uncomment out these print statements and reprint that. Okay, so what we just did here is we took a time zone aware date time set to UTC and we converted that to mountain time. But what if we have a naive date time and we want to make that naive date time time zone aware? So for example, let me go ahead and create a new local date time that doesn't have that time zone information. And remember, we can grab the local time with datetime.now, and this isn't time zone aware right now because we didn't pass in the time zone. So now if I go ahead and print out this local date time here, then you can see that I get my local time, but that it's not time zone aware. So currently I have my local time, but it doesn't have any time zone information. So if I wanted to convert this to another time zone, so let's say that I wanted to convert this to the United States Eastern time zone. So I couldn't just say datetime east equals datetime mountain dot as time zone like we did before. So let me go ahead and try this. So I'll do pytz.timezone and I will pass in that US Eastern time zone. Now if I run this, then I'm going to get an error. And if I scroll up here, it says that as time zone cannot be applied to a naive date time. And that makes sense. So in order for me to make my local naive date time time zone aware, I have to run this time zone localize function. So in order to do this, first let me comment out that. Now to run this time zone localize function, first let me grab the mountain time zone because that is what my current local time is. So I'm going to say pytz.timezone and I'm going to pass in US mountain. So now that I have that time zone, I can run its localize method and pass in my naive date time. So I'm just going to set the result to this exact same variable name. So I'm going to say dt mountain is equal to mountain time zone dot localize, and now we pass in the date that we want to localize, and that is my date time mountain. So now if I print this out, I'm going to comment out this for now. I'm going to print this out and you can see that now this was a naive date time of my local time, and then I ran localize using this mountain time zone, and now what this date time, it used to be naive and now it is time zone aware. So now let's try to run that same command that gave us an error earlier. So if I try to now convert this over to this date time east, then I can go ahead and print this out. If I save that and run it, now you can see that since our date time mountain is time zone aware, that it correctly set that time 2 hours ahead to the Eastern time zone. Okay, so I know that this video is getting a little long, but I'd like to show you all a couple of more things here really quick. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and set this back to my local date time that is time zone aware, and then I can get rid of all of this other information here for now, just to clean this up a bit. Okay, so I just want to show a couple of different ways that you can display these date times. So probably the best way to save these dates or pass them around for internal use would be the ISO format. And to display these in ISO format, it's just as easy as saying, so we'll print this out, we'll print out datetime mountain dot ISO format. Now if you're not familiar with that format, then it can look a little strange, but it is an international standard. Now, if you want to print these date times out in a specific format, then you can go to the Python documentation and look at the format codes to print these out in just about any way that you'd want. So if I go down here and look at these codes, then you can see that they have what the format code is and then the examples. So let's say that I wanted to print it out in the form July 26, 2016. So to do that, after looking at those format codes, you can use this method called strftime and then pass in the format code. So the format code that I want is %B, which is the full month, percent lowercase d, which is a 2-digit day, then I'm going to put in a comma, and then a percent sign uppercase y, which will be the full year. So if I print that, then you can see that it prints out July 26, 2016. Now, you don't have to memorize these. I've never memorized these. Every time I want to print something out in a specific format, I always go to the documentation and find the format codes that I want and then print them out that way. Now, sometimes you have the opposite. Sometimes you have a string and you want to convert that to a date time. Now, you can do that using this datetime string p time method. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So I'm going to do a datetime string here, and I'm just going to copy the exact same date that we just printed out, and I'm going to put this into a string format. So this datetime string right now is currently just a string. So I can do string operations on it, but there's no way I could do any datetime operations on this. So I have to convert this to a datetime if I want to do anything with it. So if I wanted to convert this to a datetime, then I can just say datetime dot datetime, and then we're going to run this string p time, str p time, and now what we pass in here is the string that we want to convert, and now we have to tell Python what format that string is in, and we just use the same format here, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that and just paste it in. So now I'm going to come up here and comment out that print statement, and I'm just going to print out this date time that we just created from that string. And if I print that out, you can see that that string was successfully converted over to a date time. So just to make that more clear, that was str f time, and that converts a date time to a string, and the str p time, that converts a string to a date time. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. I hope that this video cleared up any confusion when working with dates and times in Python. Now, I should mention that there is a popular Python package called Arrow that is supposed to be an easier way to work with date times, and maybe I'll try to do a video of that in the near future. But I hope that knowing these basics of the built-in datetime module, that it will allow you to solve most of the problems that you come up against. But if you do have any questions about what we covered in this video, then just feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. If you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also, it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.